So the autonomic nervous system, okay, it functions outside of your conscious awareness. Now, you don't think about it. You don't have to think about picking up a pencil. You don't have to think about moving your arm to lift weights or moving your legs to walk or run or swim. This happens without your conscious thought. So the autonomic nervous system makes routine adjustments in your body system, like balancing your head. So your head's not hitting the desk right now when you listen to me talk. Okay? That's your autonomic nervous system keeping your body in a homeostatic condition. It regulates your body temperature. Okay, you know to think about keep your body at 98.6. Okay, it coordinates your cardiovascular, respiratory, digestive, excretory, and reproductive functions. Okay, you don't have to think about those. They're automatic. They're outside your conscious awareness. Okay. Autonomic nervous system. Axons innervate the visceral organs. Okay, those are your intestines, your digestive tract, your heart, your lungs, things like that. Has afferent and efferent neurons. Remember, afferent is sensory information going in. Efferent is motor control coming out. Afferent pathways originate in the visceral receptors. Okay? So your pathways from the organ start at the organ itself and transfer information afferent into the central nervous system. Somatic nervous system. That's your autonomic nervous system. Somatic is under your control. Those are axons innervate the skeletal muscles. Remember, the autonomic system innervates your glands, your smooth muscle, your cardiac muscle. The somatic nervous system innervates your skeletal muscle. Those are under your controls. Those also have afferent and efferent neurons. Okay? The afferent pathways originate in the skeletal muscle and sends information into the central nervous system. Okay? There's two autonomic nervous systems I'm going to talk about. Okay, there's two major subdivisions. There's a sympathetic division and there's a parasympathetic division. Okay? The sympathetic division is mostly active during times of stress, exertion, or emergency. That's your fight or flight response. That's your body gets keyed up to do something. That's sympathetic. Parasympathetic, that's what's active when you're resting, sitting down, reading a book, digesting a big meal. That's when your parasympathetic system is active. Okay? So those are two divisions of the autonomic nervous system. Your sympathetic and your parasympathetic. Sympathetic is your fight or flight. Parasympathetic is your relaxation. Okay? So here's your sympathetic division. Okay? You can see the division is often called the fight or flight system because an increase in sympathetic activity generally stimulates tissue metabolism, increase alertness, and prepares the body to deal with emergencies. It gets you ready to handle what's coming up. Okay, you can see there's preganglionic neuron. There's preganglionic neurons. There's ganglia, which is your large cell there. I don't know. Let me see if you can see the mouse there. No, you can't see the mouse. So I can't see it on there either. Let me see if I can get something to point with on this one. I'm doing it this way. Let me try this. Yeah. Everybody can see. All right. Can you see my white circle? Yep. All right. Cool. If you look at this, let me see if I can get a little bit narrower. Yes. All right. There's a little red dot. These are your preganglionic neurons here. Okay. Because here's the ganglion. You can see them sitting right here. There's a swelling on the disc. You can see the ganglion. So the neurons before leaving the spinal cord, before the ganglion, are your preganglionic neurons. They're located from T1 to L2. Okay. Then you have your ganglion, which are your swelling, which is where your cell bodies are located. Okay. I think it might be better just using the big circle here. Okay. So in the center, you see your ganglion. And after, the ganglion, then you have your postganglionic fibers. Okay. Those go to your target organs. So you have preganglionic neurons, your ganglia, then your postganglionic neurons, which go to the target organs. Let me try to get through it. So, there's your target organs. And the black lines here are your postganglionic neurons. The red lines are your preganglionic neurons. And those little swellings in between the two are your ganglions, where the cell bodies are located. Okay. Parasympathetic, a little bit different arrangement. Okay. This is the rest mode, conserves energy, promotes digestion, restfulness, and repose. Lets the body recharge, basically. Again, now here you got preganglionic neurons that are farther away from the central nervous system. And those don't go where the T1 to L2, okay? These go in the cervical from the cranial nerves and from the sacral nerves. So these only occur up in the cervical area, okay? And then down by the sacrum. There's nothing in between the thoracic and lumbar region. But here you have your preganglionic neurons, which travel a long ways to the ganglion. Then the ganglion are by the target organs, and then those are the postganglionic neurons. So again, the red lines, the red nerves are your preganglionic fibers. Then it hits the ganglion. Then the black ones are the postganglionic fibers that you can see. So with the sympathetic nervous system, the ganglia are lined up right next to the spinal cord. With the parasympathetic division, the ganglia are farther away from the central nervous system, right by the target organs. Okay. Okay, and there's also a third division, which people don't usually call, but it's not usually discussed, called the enteric nervous system. And those are neurons that look into the digestive tract, and many visceral reflexes are initiated by the enteric nervous system. But most of everything is delegated to the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so the sympathetic division, that's what we're talking about first. The preganglionic neurons are between T1 and L2. So your preganglionic neurons start at T1 and work through it down to L2. The cell bodies of the nerves in the ganglia are very near the vertebral column, like we showed in that picture. That's the sympathetic chain ganglia, and you have collateral ganglia. They're specialized neurons in the interior of the suprarenal gland. The suprarenal gland has a special function in the sympathetic division. You'll see that there is no synapse in going from the central nervous system to the interior of the suprarenal gland. Again, the suprarenal gland is the same thing as the adrenal gland. Don't get it confused. They just changed the name. Okay. So here, this is the sympathetic division. You have T1 to L2. Okay. So here's T1 to L2. As we're going across, then it divides to the sympathetic chain ganglia, the collateral ganglia, and then the suprarenal in the medulla. Okay. So the sympathetic chain ganglia go to the visceral effector cells in the thoracic cavity. The collateral ganglia go to the visceral effectors in the abdominal pelvic cavity, and the suprarenal medullary goes through organs throughout the body. In other words, for the suprarenal nerve fiber, it goes from the central nervous system into the medulla of the suprarenal gland. That produces a hormone, which we find out as adrenaline and norepinephrine, which circulates in the bloodstream, which causes effects on the cells. So it causes effect through the bloodstream, not through a direct connection with the nerve anymore, once it hits the adrenal gland. So it occurs through the release of hormones into the circulation, which is going to be norepinephrine and epinephrine. And epinephrine is adrenaline. It gets your body keyed up. Okay. The sympathetic chain ganglia, or also called the perivertebral ganglia or lateral ganglia, control effectors in the body wall, the head, neck, limbs, and thoracic cavity. Okay. Remember, that is from T1 to L2. That's your body wall, your head, your neck, limbs, and thoracic cavity. Okay, your preganglionic neurons, their cell bodies are in the lateral gray horns. Remember, the gray part of the horns of the spinal cord are your cell bodies. Okay, the nerve cells themselves, the soma of the nerve cell. Okay, axons enter into the ventral roots for the preganglionic neurons. Okay, your ventral roots are your motor roots, where you have your effects. Those are your effector systems. Okay, those are your efferent neurons coming out. Okay, the collateral ganglia, those innervate the effectors in the abdominal pelvic cavity. The specialized neurons, we talked about, are the modified sympathetic ganglia in the suprarenal gland. Neurons release the neurotransmitters that act like hormones, which are epinephrine and norepinephrine. That's your sympathetic division. Okay. The chain ganglia are located right along the spinal cord. Okay. The ventral roots join the dorsal root, which forms a spinal nerve. Remember, the ventral root is the outgoing, the efferent, The dorsal root is the afferent, the joint together forming the spinal nerve, which has afferent and efferent nerves. They separate just prior to entering in the central nervous system, into the spinal cord. Okay? It forms a spinal nerve because the ventral dorsal root. That spinal nerve passes through the intervertebral foramen, and then the white ramus branches off the spinal nerve. Remember the rami branch, we did the lab on Monday? The rami branched after the ganglia. Okay, after it passed out and formed the spinal nerve. So here's what it looks like. You can see, go back. Let's go back. Right, so here's our is this going to come across here? There's our little red dot. This is our ventral root. You can see it coming down here. This is a dorsal root up here. You see when they merge, this is the spinal nerve. And the spinal nerves combine, and that forms a rami as it branches off after the ganglion. Okay. So that's your motor system. Those are your nerves coming out. You see the red is the pre-ganglionic neurons going from the central nervous system, from the spinal cord, comes out, enters the ganglia. And there's a synapse right here. So this neuron passes information to another neuron. So this is your pre-ganglionic neuron, the neuron that occurs before it enters the ganglia. Once it enters the ganglia and connects to the cell body of the next neuron and transmits information, then this becomes the post-ganglionic neuron. And that feeds into the target organ. Okay? Remember, the rami is formed, okay, after the spinal nerve is formed from the ventral and dorsal roots combined together. Okay, so major effects of the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, these are the postganglionic fibers. You got constriction of cutaneous blood vessels. So we got reduction to the circulation to the skin and most other organs of the body wall. You got acceleration of blood flow to skeletal muscles in the brain. Stimulation of energy production used by skeletal muscle tissue. Release of stored lipids from subcutaneous adipose tissue. You get stimulation of secretion by sweat glands. You get stimulation of the rectus pillae muscles, which is what causes you goosebumps, and dilation of the pupils and focusing for distant objects. Okay, that's the effects that get your body keyed up for the fight or flight response. That gets all the energy where it's supposed to be directed to. Okay, the major effects produced by postganglionic fibers in the thoracic cavity: acceleration of your heart rate, increasing strength of by increasing the cardiac contractions. Okay, when you get in a stressful situation, you feel your heart pounding. That's because your contractions are getting greater. And dilation of the respiratory passages. So the respiratory passageways increase, gives you more air, more oxygen, so more energy can get to your body. Okay, you also get dilation, increased heart rate, and dilation of your pupils. So you can see danger far off. Okay. So function of your sympathetic chain. This is basically this one, that same area here. Decreases blood circulation through the skin. Again, you want that blood circulating to your muscles, not to the skin right at the time. You want your muscles to be very active. Increases heart rate and blood circulation to skeletal muscles. Okay, stimulates more energy production by the skeletal muscles. The rectus pillae muscle and sweat glands become active. Release of stored lipids. You're breaking down fats, so you have more glucose in the body, so you get more energy when it's needed. And it dilates your pupils and respiratory tube. Pupils, so you can see threat at a greater distance while your pupils dilate. And respiratory tube, so you can get more air in for more aerobic respiration, for aerobic metabolism. Okay, so the sympathetic chain, we said, goes from, there's 11 to 12 thoracic ganglia. There's 3 cervical ganglia. Okay, 11 to 12 thoracic ganglia, 2 to 5 lumbar ganglia, 4 to 5 sacral ganglia, and 1 coccygeal ganglia. That's what consists of your sympathetic chain. Okay, and here you can see it. Here's your cervical ganglia right here up on the top. Let me see if I can move my mouse over to here. Okay, the red dot here, this is your cervical sympathetic ganglia. This is your thoracic, your lumbar, and your sacral. I lost my red dot. There it is. And then the sacral ganglia. That's how sympathetic systems arrange. The preganglionic and postganglionic neurons. The cervical chain only has postganglionic neurons. Okay. There are no preganglionic neurons for the postcervical chain. There's no line up there. The only line is the thoracic chain, T1 to L2. So the cervical chain has no preganglionic neurons. The thoracic chain has both preganglionic and postganglionic neurons, which we talked about when we saw the ganglia there. The lumbar chain does not have preganglionic neurons. It only has postganglionic neurons. The sacral chain only has postganglionic neurons. And the coccygeal chain only has postganglionic neurons. Going back to our picture, you look at the picture here, you can see the only ones where you have these preganglionic neurons, these red neurons, right here where that dot is. These are your preganglionic neurons, are your T1 through L2. All these other ones, the symphysis chain breaks off, and all you have is postganglionic neurons. There are no preganglionic neurons in the cervical region or in the sacral region or the lower lumbar region. Okay? You only have preganglionic neurons in the thoracic region, T1 to L2. All the rest just have postganglionic neurons. Okay. Oh, there's a chain right there. You can see where it's highlighted T1, T2, all the way L2. All those yellow highlights, those are your preganglionic neurons. Then the black lines after it are your postganglionic neurons. Okay. So again, the cervical, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal regions only have postganglionic neurons. There are no preganglionic neurons coming off the spinal cord. Only the thoracic has both preganglionic and postganglionic neurons. Okay. Splanchnic nerves are collateral ganglia. That's your collateral ganglia. The splanchnic nerves are bundles of preganglionic fibers. Okay, they converge on the collateral ganglia, and they innervate your visceral tissues and organs. Okay, you can see there. You can see the splanchnic nerves as they come off from the preganglionic neurons. You can see the highlight one, the greater splanchnic, the superior mesenteric, and the lesser splanchnic, and the lumbar splanchnic nerves, and the sacral splanchnic nerves. Okay? You can see how they come together, form into a ganglion, and then innervate into the different tissues. So these are groupings of the preganglionic neurons as they come off the spinal cord. Okay. Again, your collateral ganglia, you can see your splanchnic nerve being formed after the dorsal and ventral root fuse to form a spinal nerve. Then the information comes down and forms a splanchnic nerve, and that goes into another ganglia, and that goes into the different organ systems. So major effects of your postganglionic fibers from the collateral ganglia, okay, you constriction of small arteries and reduction of flow of blood to visceral organs. You get decreased activity of digestive glands, stimulation and release of glucose from glycogen reserves in the liver, stimulation and release of lipids from adipose tissue, relaxation of smooth muscles in the walls of the urinary bladder, reduction of the rate of urine formation in the kidneys, control of some aspects of sexual function, such as ejaculation in males. Okay. So those are all effects of the collateral ganglion system. Again, it works right along with the sympathetic nervous system to get your body ready for the fight or flight response. Okay. There's three collateral ganglia. There's the celiac, the superior mesenteric, and the inferior mesenteric. The celiac ganglia, they innervate your stomach, duodenum, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, spleen, and kidney. The superior mesenteric innervates your small intestines and initial segments of the large intestine. And the inferior mesenteric innervates terminal portion of the large intestine, the kidneys, urinary bladder, and sex organs. Okay. Think of those three collateral ganglia, the celiac, superior mesenteric, and inferior mesenteric, and what they innervate. And again, to get your body ready for the fight or flight response. And you can see your celiac ganglia. Mm-hmm. You can see the superior mesenteric ganglion, which is formed from the fiber, so the preganglionic fibers. And you got your inferior mesenteric ganglion. Now you notice one thing that's different here. This is what we talked about a little bit before. If you look at, let's see if I can bring this over here. Okay, so look right in the middle of the red circle. You see the red line where it says greater splanchnic nerve coming down? And you see one red line continues. It doesn't synapse in the ganglia. You'll see this coming off of the greater splenic nerve. Okay. You'll see the preganglionic fiber stays red all the way down through here in the middle of that white circle, right? Until the top, the medulla of the suprarenal gland. You can see it right here. Let's see if we can get a little bit better view here. Okay, see this comes off. Right in here, you'll see that one preganglionic neuron doesn't go through a synapse. It goes straight through. See, it continues as a red nerve. This is still a preganglionic neuron. There is no synapse. It goes straight to the suprarenal gland, medulla. That's what produces norepinephrine and epinephrine. Okay, there is no postganglionic neuron. This one produces norepinephrine, epinephrine in the body and causes the hormones release and causes the body to key up for the fight or flight response. Because it's like adrenaline, it's adrenaline being released in your body. Okay, so that one, the preganglionic neuron does not synapse. The one that transfers to the suprarenal gland does not have a synapse in the ganglion. So there is no post-ganglionic fiber because there's no synapse. You can't have post-ganglionic. So you have the preganglionic fiber that travels all the way from the spinal cord all the way into the suprarenal gland. Okay, that's the one exception. All the other nerves have a synapse and a preganglionic and a postganglionic fiber, and then innervate their organs for their function. Okay, that's because the suprarenal gland, you're stimulating adrenaline, epinephrine, into the bloodstream, and that's traveling the bloodstream, activating other organs of the body. It's acting as a hormone. Okay, and the suprarenal medulla we just talked about. Remember, all organs have a medulla and a cortex. Cortex is your outer layer, medulla is your inner layer. So we're talking about the inner layer of the suprarenal gland or adrenal gland. So it says that preganglionic fibers proceed to the suprarenal medulla. There is no synapse. It goes through the ganglia, but it doesn't synapse with anything. So it goes straight through. So it stays a preganglionic fiber. It goes right to the medulla of the suprarenal gland. Okay, it releases neurotransmitters, epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine's adrenaline. Okay, you ever go to the dentist, get an injection when you do local anesthetic, and your heart rate goes up, you start sweating like crazy? Does that ever happen to anybody? No. Happens once in a while because what we do in local anesthetic, our local anesthetic has epinephrine in it. Okay, and if it goes into a blood vessel by mistake, so you're supposed to aspirate, but every once in a while you can get to a blood vessel. Then that epinephrine travels through the body and it causes the fight or flight response. It causes an adrenaline response. And your heart races faster, you start sweating in the dental chair, and people think they're having a heart attack, but they're not. It's just the epinephrine in the body. Okay, we put it in there because when we're working in dentistry, we're getting that field numb. Epinephrine shuts down your external blood vessels, right? It keeps the blood in the body for the muscle to out during the fight or flight response. So when we're doing dental work, we don't want bleeding everywhere. So epinephrine's inside our local anesthetic. So it decreases the bleeding in the area we're working on, so we can see better. So that's what epinephrine does to the body. So epinephrine and norepinephrine are released by the suprarenal, the medulla of the suprarenal gland. Epinephrine is also called adrenaline. Epinephrine accounts for 70-80% of these secretions. So most of the secretions are epinephrine. About 20% are norepinephrine. And these cause changes in metabolic activity of the cells. They increase metabolism. All right, here's your line again. You can see your red line. You have the suprarenal medulla. Okay, medulla suprarenal gland. You can see that is a preganglionic fiber. Goes all the way back. Synapse is there. There's no synapse, but it goes through the ganglia and it travels right to the spinal cord. Okay, so the nerve innervating the suprarenal gland into the medulla of it is a preganglionic fiber. It's the only one. Everything else that innervates organs, the eyes, the cerebellum, the heart, the lungs, the urinary bladder, everything else, okay, is post-ganglionic fibers. That's your one exception. You can see it goes to the suprarenal medulla inside the gland, and it is a pre-ganglionic fiber. It does not have a synapse. It starts off in the spinal cord, runs through it, forms your spinal nerve, your rami, out through there, and into the suprarenal gland. Okay, and it releases epinephrine, norepinephrine into the general circulation. So what it does is it doesn't cause that gland to do anything except it secretes epinephrine in the bloodstream. And adrenaline in your blood, you know what that makes you do. Okay. People's dialect, you get that fight or flight response. Your body gets prepared for emergency situation. Okay, effects of the sympathetic stimulation. You have increased alertness. So you're looking around, watching your environment. You have a feeling of energy and euphoria. You get that feeling that you can do anything. You get muscle all pumped up, you're all ready to go. Increased cardiovascular activity, the heart becomes stronger. Not stronger, the contractions of the heart become more forceful and more rapid. Okay? Increased respiratory activity, you start breathing faster. Increased muscle tone, your muscles become stronger, they get keyed up. And increased mobilization of energy reserve. You start bringing down glycogen to glucose. You start breaking down your fatty acids into glycogen for backup for more glucose. Okay. So the sympathetic ganglion fibers release what's called acetylcholine at the synapse of the ganglion neuron. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter, which means it transmits from one fiber to the next. It secretes a chemical into the synaptic cleft, into the space between the neurons, between the axon and the next dendrite or next cell body, wherever it's connecting to. Okay, these are cholinergic synapses. They release acetylcholine. Okay. The stimulation of ganglion neurons causes the release of norepinephrine at the neuropathic junction. These are called adrenergic neurons. They release norepinephrine. Okay, the other ones release acetylcholine. Those are cholinergic synapses. So cholinergic synapses release acetylcholine as a neurotransmitter. Adrenic synapses release norepinephrine as a neurotransmitter. Okay. So some of the ganglion neurons release acetylcholine, especially at the neuroaffected junction of the skeletal muscles. So where it meets the skeletal muscles, that's where acetylcholine is released. When the nerve comes down, it goes to the preganglionic fiber, goes to the ganglion, goes to the postganglionic fiber, travels to the nerve or the muscle. When that nerve meets the muscle, that's who releases acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is released into the synapse that causes your muscles to contract. Okay, and you can see your preganglionic fiber. Okay, goes to the ganglion to the postganglionic fiber, goes down to the muscle cell. Once it hits the muscle cell, all these areas are synapses right down here. Okay, these synapses release acetylcholine, and these cause a muscle to contract. Oops. Okay. So all these little vesicles contain the different neurotransmitters. If it's down here, this will contain your acetylcholine. Okay. The plasmalemma is, remember, the cell membrane. There's two classes of plasmalemma receptors. Remember, for a chemical to have an effect on a cell, it has to have a receptor. It has to bind to a receptor. So there's two classes, alpha receptors and beta receptors. Alpha receptors are stimulated by epinephrine and norepinephrine. Beta receptors are only stimulated by epinephrine. They're not affected by norepinephrine. So your sympathetic division that we talked about consists of parallel chains on both sides of the spinal cord. Okay, remember T1 to L2. Okay, those are your parallel chains. You have preganglionic fibers. They're very short because the ganglia are lined up right next to the spinal cord. The postganglion fibers are long, and they extend from the ganglion by the spinal cord to the organ that it affects. The sympathetic division shows considerable divergence. It breaks apart into many, many systems. It comes up. So when one neuron breaks into many others, it shows divergence. So a preganglionic neuron releases acetylcholine. Most postganglionic neurons release norepinephrine. So all of your preganglionic neurons, when it releases into the ganglion, okay, those release acetylcholine. Most of your postganglionic neurons release norepinephrine in the sympathetic division. Okay, the effective response depends on the presence of either alpha or beta receptors. Okay, remember, beta receptors only respond to epinephrine. Alpha receptors respond to epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay, there's a summary of the division. You see how they line up right by this? The spinal cord, you can see the preganglionic fibers are short, with the one exception for the suprarenal gland. Okay. The postganglionic fibers are very long and innervate your target organs. The preganglionic all release acetylcholine as a neurotransmitter. The postganglionic fibers usually release norepinephrine as their neurotransmitter. Remember, the sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight response. That's what your body does in an emergency situation. When you're scared, everything keys up. Everybody's heard the stories where people have superhuman strength. Like a car falls on a child or something, and they can actually lift the edge of the car up to get the child up from under. That's because your sympathetic system, all the muscles, all the blood, everything's going to your muscles, and your muscles are actually stronger than they normally are. Okay? So you get this fight or flight response. Either you're going to fight or you're going to run like crazy. Okay? It's a fight or flight response. Okay? And it keys up the body to handle emergency situation. And you can feel, when you're scared, you can feel your heartbeat. You know your heart's beating harder. It physically is beating harder. You're breathing harder, you're sweating. Okay? Parasympathetic is the exact opposite. That's the yin and the yang. The parasympathetic are in the brain stem and the sacral segments. So this parasympathetic division does not occur from T1 to L2. It occurs above it in the brain stem and below it in the sacral segment of the spinal cord. That's the only two places the parasympathetic division occurs. So the top and bottom are parasympathetic. All the middle chains along the spinal cord are sympathetic. The preganglionic neurons, the ones that go before the ganglia, do not diverge as much as the sympathetic division. Remember, the sympathetic branched everywhere. Went down the whole column and branched through all the different vertebrae and innervated all across. The parasympathetic does not diverge as much. Okay? So the parasympathetic division is more localized and specific as compared to the sympathetic. Sympathetic goes all throughout the body. Parasympathetic is very specific where it goes. Okay? So the postganglionic neurons are near the terminal, the target within where the target organ is. So the preganglionic fibers are very long in the parasympathetic nervous system. Then they get to the ganglion, which is very close to the target organ. So the postganglionic fibers are very short, exact opposite of the sympathetic nervous system. And I'll show you a picture of that. Not right yet, but I will eventually. Okay? So the preganglionic fibers leave the brainstem at cranial nerve number 3, cranial nerve number 7, which is your facial nerve, cranial nerve number 9 to the parotid and salivary glands, and cranial nerve number 10, which is your vagus nerve, to your visceral organ, thoracic cavity, and abdominal cavity. Preganglion leave the sacral region via the pelvic nerve. So there's only two places the parasympathetic division leaves the central nervous system. It leaves it at the brain through the cranial nerves, and it leaves it at the pelvic system, at the sacral region. Those are the only two regions.
Just coming up getting swabbed.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is what it looks like. This is where it leaves it. Remember, the sympathetic had all the divisions going down the entire spinal cord. This is just at the brain stem and just at the sacral region of the spinal cord. So cranial nerves number 3, 7, 9, and 10. And it goes to the different ganglia, the ciliary ganglia, the pteropalatine and submandibular ganglia, the ocular ganglia, and the intramural ganglia. Okay, those affect your eyes, your nasal glands, parotid salivary glands, visceral organs of your neck, thoracic cavity, and your abdominal cavity. Okay, nuclei in the sacral region, S2 to S4, goes through the pelvic nerves. That goes to the intramural ganglia. Intramural ganglia go to the visceral organs in the interior portion of your abdominal pelvic cavity. So most of this affects your glands, your digestive tract, your eyes, and things like that. It's not that key system that goes everywhere and gets your body keyed up for emergency. It's a system that goes kind of chills you out, relaxes you. But you're still going to have your preganglionic and your postganglionic fibers. And this is what it looks like. Now look at the difference here. Remember, if you looked at the sympathetic, okay, looked at the sympathetic, remember all the nerves fall right along the spinal cord here. They all branch off right here and distribute out through most of the organs of the body. Here you only have the ones coming off the central nervous system, the cranial nerves, and the sacral nerves from the pelvic nerve. That's it. Okay, big difference. Look how long the preganglionic fibers are. See the red fibers? Look how long they travel. Remember, the sympathetic is right next to the spinal cord. They only went real short distance. Here, the preganglia are traveling a long distance to the ganglia. Each ganglia is located very close to the target organ. So the postganglionic fibers are extremely short. I mean, look at the ones in the lungs here. Just a second, the pointer come back up here. Okay, look at the heart. The heart has this, the black ones are the postganglionic fibers. Look at the lungs. Okay, here's your preganglionic fibers. Travels all the way down here, all the way down here. Okay, and look what it does in the lungs. Those are your postganglionic. Your postganglionic are very small. Your preganglionic are very large. Exact opposite of the sympathetic nervous system. And it does the exact opposite thing. Okay, it's designed to work in its own area and do the exact opposite thing. So they balance each other. Does that make sense? Sort of. So general function, your parasympathetic division. Okay, relaxation. You want to kick back. Food processing. Energy absorption. Okay, pupil constriction. Remember, in an emergency situation, your pupils dilate. They dilate so you can see far away. You can find any dangers coming at you. Okay, when you're relaxing, there is no danger. Sitting back, just relaxing, your pupils constrict back to normal. They're not looking far off in the distance for any threats. You get secretion of digestive enzymes, salivary glands, gastric glands, duodenal glands, pancreas, liver, all those start functioning to digest your food now. You don't need your muscles to activate. You don't need to run away from anything. You're going to sit there and digest your food and start to store energy and process your food. Okay. Secretion of hormones that promote nutrient absorption. Okay. So now all your energy is going to breaking down food and getting nutrients back in your body. Increased smooth muscle activity of digestive system. Peristaltic activity, moving through food, churning of food. Okay. The food moves through the stomach, pulverizes it, moves down through the small intestine. Okay. That smooth muscle has to push that food along. That muscle activity increases. Stimulation and coordination of defecation. Okay. Contraction of urinary bladder. Okay. Constriction of the rest. Reduced heart rate and sexual arousal. Okay. You get sexual arousal when you're relaxing. You don't want to be in a fight or flight situation and be sexually aroused. That's not a good thing for running away. It's not a good thing for fighting away. Okay. That's during your relaxation phase. Okay. All right. So all preganglionic and postganglionic fibers release acetylcholine in the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay. So everyone, preganglionic and postganglionic, release acetylcholine. There is no norepinephrine. They release acetylcholine at their neural effector junctions through the synapse. Most parasympathetic stimulation are short-lived. Okay? You don't want that continuous activity. You want to do its job and be done with it. Okay, that is because an enzyme called acetylcholine esterase. Acetylcholine esterase breaks down acetylcholine. So acetylcholine is released into the synapse, activates the receptors, and if it stays in there, it keeps activating the receptors, and the muscles contract and contract and contract. So acetylcholine breaks it down. So acetylcholine esterase, breaks it down. So that stops the action of the diversion from stimulating the target organ. Okay. So any diffuse acetylcholine are be deactivated by the acetylcholine esterase, the enzyme. So parasympathetic stimulations are very localized. Look at that. They release acetylcholine esterase. They have their effect, and then they're done with their effect. Okay. Now, several poisons and different things work by inhibiting acetylcholine esterase. If you give someone a poison, succinylcholine, you see that in operating rooms. Okay. The acetylcholine esterase is deactivated. So what happens? It stays in it, the muscles contract, and you get tonic seizures. Okay, the muscles can contract and nothing's going to stop it. Okay, so acetylcholine esterase breaks down acetylcholine. That's its function. Okay, there's two types of acetylcholine receptors, okay, that are found in your postsynaptic plasmalemma. So where it meets the membrane and the postsynaptic fibers, there's two types of receptors. There's nicotinic receptors and this muscarinic receptors. Nicotinic receptors, so good sound, respond to nicotine. Nicotine binds those receptors. They're found in the surface of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic ganglion neurons. Okay? So they increase different functions, relaxation, make people relax, and they increase alertness at the same time also, because they're also found in the sympathetic ganglion. That's why smoking is so addictive. We're going to do that in just a minute here too. Muscarinic receptors respond to muscarine. Okay, they found the surface of the parasympathetic cholinergic neuroeffector junctions is where the muscarinic receptors are. Okay. So the parasympathetic nervous system involves cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10. It evolves from the brain, and then the sacral segments S2 to S4. Everything in the middle is your sympathetic system. All parasympathetic neurons are cholinergic. That means all of them, the presynaptic and the postsynaptic, release acetylcholine. The effect is always excitatory, always causes the next neuron to fire. Release of acetylcholine on the neuroeffector junctions that stimulates the muscarinic receptors. Those can be excitatory or inhibitory. Okay. Parasympathetic stimulation is usually brief. It doesn't last as long as sympathetic. Parasympathetic stimulation is localized. It's not divergent like the sympathetic one. And parasympathetic nerves innervate your head, thorax, abdominal, and pelvic organs. Okay. Epinephrine stimulates your central nervous system. And we talked about that. Adrenaline, it increases blood pressure, increases your breathing rate and the depth of your breath, and it increases the heart rate. It beats faster and constricts harder. Okay. Nicotine. Nicotine is very much like heroin and cocaine. It has similar effect, and it's just as addictive. Okay. Nicotine, heroin, cocaine all increase levels of dopamine in the body. Dopamine, there's a reward and pleasure center in your body, in the brain. Dopamine affects that center. Release of dopamine gives you a pleasurable center in the brain. Nicotine also affects anxiety and depression. People who smoke cigarettes, okay, their anxiety goes down and their depression goes down when they smoke. Okay. So smoking, I love your moods. And anybody who's been around smoking who's tried to quit knows that, right? Your moods change drastically when you stop smoking. Okay? So it alters anxiety levels in your moods. Some smoking can act as an anti-anxiety, antidepressant. With chronic use, the body adapts to nicotine, though. Okay? So an increase in anxiety and depression with withdrawals. Your body gets used to the nicotine. Okay? And it needs more nicotine to make that same effect. That's why people have to chain smoke. I mean, I've been around people that smoke and have another cigarette lit before the last one goes out. They have to have that constant supply of nicotine, and the body needs it. Okay? If you get rid of that, anxiety will increase, depression will increase with withdrawal. That's how one of the problems with Chantix. Chantix is a drug we use on the Marine Corps base, right, a lot of Marines, to get them to stop smoking. Okay? There's a high suicide rate with Chantix, especially with Marines. Problem is, it's not the Chantix causing it. What nicotine does is it suppresses your dreams. Okay, with PTSD, a lot of Marines have seen a lot of things in a lot of combat situations, and the nicotine suppresses those dreams from coming forward. When Chantix gets you off of it, the nicotine withdrawal causes those dreams to recur. It's not the Chantix doing it. It's the withdrawal of the nicotine. So that's what they do it in levels. You don't just start smoking all at once. You go down to 1 pack, half a pack, correct, with the Chantix. It's a tapered situation that they have a whole program on the base for doing that. But you're really going to be really careful with people that are exposed to combat situations, because it can lead to an increased suicide because of the decrease in nicotine, because nicotine suppresses those dreams that you have from PTSD and other problems. So the effects of nicotine on the body, what it does is it decreases your appetite. It improves your mood. It's an antidepressant. It increases your heart rate, increases blood pressure, stimulates your memory, increases in alertness, and it increases in your focus. So people say they perform better when they smoke. Yeah, they do, because they're used to that stimulation. Okay, and to come off that is a hard withdrawal. Smoking delivers nicotine to the brain within 10 seconds of inhalation. So once you puff that cigarette, in 10 seconds, that nicotine's gone to your brain. That's extremely quick. So the acute effects dissipate quickly, though. Continue smoking to maintain the pressure effect to prevent withdrawals. So that effect, it gets in fast and goes out fast. 10 seconds, it gets there, gives the effect, then goes out. Now, to keep that effect, to keep that alertness, that focus, that pleasurable feeling, that euphoric feeling that you get from cigarette smoking, you've got to keep smoking because the effect goes away very quickly. And the more you smoke, the more it takes nicotine to stimulate that same receptor because receptors get used to that feeling. We'll do that in the next chapter. We'll show the receptor get used to that effect. All right, so relationship between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic division. Okay, remember we talked about the differences. You all have differences in mind now. Sympathetic is widespread effect on visceral organs. Parasympathetic is very narrow, okay, very specific. Motor structure is innervated by the specific cranial nerves and the pelvic nerves. We only innervates those two areas. Okay, most vital organs are innervated by both the sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves. Because you have to be able to do one and the other. You have to be able to control what the body does. This is known as dual innervation. Okay? One's an agonist, one's an antagonist.
7.
In relation to each other. Is there a question? Okay. So there's dual innervation in the head region. Parasympathetic fibers accompany the parasympathetic fibers to the target organ. Okay. Thoracic and abdominal pelvic regions. The parasympathetic and sympathetic fibers mingle, form a plexus. Remember, plexus is just a group, like a braiding of these nerves together. These plexes form cardiac, pulmonary, esophageal, celiac, inferior mesenteric, and hypogastric plexus. We do different dual innervations. Okay, you see the vagus nerve, you see the trachea in the center. You see the right vagus nerve and the left vagus nerve dropping down. You see your sympathetic nervous system around the spinal cord, and your parasympathetic branches from the brain and from the pelvic region. So these are the autonomic plexuses and ganglions. You have your cardiac plexus. Okay, you have your pulmonary plexus. You can see the nerves that come out together. Thoracic sympathetic chain ganglia, the esophageal plexus, celiac plexus and ganglion. See the ganglion of the swelling. The superior mesenteric plexus, ganglion, I'm sorry. Okay, the inferior mesenteric plexus and ganglion. The hypogastric plexus, you see all the nerves grouped together like the braid system, and the pelvic sympathetic chain. Okay, we're going to compare the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. We're going to compare the length of the preganglionic fibers, the length of the postganglionic fibers, the location of the ganglia, the neurotransmitters, and the degree of divergence. So the first one, we're going to compare sympathetic and parasympathetic. What about the length of the preganglionic fibers? In the sympathetic system, the preganglionic fibers are short. In the parasympathetic system, the preganglionic fibers are very long. Okay. The postganglionic fibers in the sympathetic system, are the postganglionic fibers long or short? Postganglionic, the sympathetic ones, the postganglionic ones are longer. And the parasympathetic, the postganglionic fibers are short. What are the locations of the ganglia? In the sympathetic system, where are the ganglia located? Right along the spinal cord, right? Yeah, perfect. Or close to the spinal cord. Perfect. What about the parasympathetic? Where are the ganglia located?
In the organ?
Yeah, real close to, real close to the organs. Yeah, they're out by the organs. Okay, they're not by the spinal cord at all. They're in or near the target organs. The neurotransmitter release in the sympathetic system, we had norepinephrine. Okay, in the parasympathetic system, we've got acetylcholine. Okay, and the degree of divergence. The sympathetic division, is that very diverse or non-diverse? It's very spread out, right? Now, a lot of divergence. So it's 1 to 32. The parasympathetic system is not as diverse. It's more specific. It's like 1 to 6. So one neuron goes to 32 neurons in the sympathetic system where it branches out. The parasympathetic is more localized. One neuron goes to maybe 6 different neurons. Okay, so that sums up everything between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Again, they're opposite systems. They control opposite things. Sympathetic is your fight or flight response. Parasympathetic is your kickback relaxation response. So looking at the picture, this just sympathetic system, short preganglionic fibers, goes to the ganglion, long postganglionic fibers. The parasympathetic, long preganglionic fibers into the ganglion, short postganglionic fibers to the target organ. Okay. This is just a chart that sums everything we've been talking about, the different areas, the different levels where they occur. This basically the sympathetic was T1 to L2, and then the parasympathetic was your brainstem for your cranial nerves and your S2, S4 sacral nerves. And everything else we've gone over, this kind of sums it up here. Okay. The last section of this is your visceral reflexes. These provide autonomic motor responses to monitor and persuade the higher centers. Okay. So it's a reflex response from the brain. We talked about this before. All visceral reflexes that go up are polysynaptic. They have more than one synapse. Reflexes can be long or short. Long reflexes. Visceral sensory neurons go to the central nervous system to the dorsal root. Remember, the ventral root of the central nervous system is the efferent system, motor going out. The dorsal roots are your afferent system, sensory information coming in. Okay, these are what's called the inner neurons within the central nervous system. Information is interpreted in the spinal cord or the brain. The autonomic nervous system sends motor commands to the visceral organs to supply the correct function for the reflex. Okay, we talked about like salivation when you look at a donut shop, things like that. Short reflexes. Sensory nerve impulses go to the ganglionic neurons. They don't go into the central nervous system. Motor commands are distributed by the post-ganglionic fibers. Okay, so the impulse bypasses the central nervous system, which is a new concept. We always thought nerves had to go into the central nervous system to be devoted on, but they don't. With a short reflex, those post-ganglionic fibers can feel something, go back to the ganglion, and send it right back down the efferent system to get a response. Okay, so here's your long reflex. Your long reflex is your stimulus in peripheral tissues, goes through the afferent system, okay, goes through the dorsal horn, goes into the central nervous system, the spinal, the brain. Spinal cord votes on it and has an interneuron that passes information on to a motor neuron. Then you have your preganglionic neuron coming out, and then it gets to your postganglionic neuron. Okay, the short reflex bypasses all that. The short reflex stimulus goes back to the ganglion, and the postganglionic neuron fires. It doesn't even go to the spinal cord. So reactions can occur extremely fast when they need to. They don't have to get into the spinal cord. They can get affected directly into the postganglionic, the ganglion, and then the postganglionic neuron can affect it. Okay? But all reflexes are polysynaptic. There are more than one synapse. The stimulus goes to the ganglion has an interneuron, which has a synapse, the synapse with the which is the postganglionic neuron, and that fires it. Okay? So your long reflex goes into the central nervous system. Your short reflex goes into the postganglionic fibers. Goes into the ganglion, and the postganglionic fiber is activated without any connection to the central nervous system. All right, who's paying attention? Last picture. What goes in the box? You got your 7 choices on the left side. What has to be activated for the stimulus to occur? You need receptors, right? You got receptors in the peripheral, receptors in your peripheral tissue. You got to figure out the stimulus. This is a long reflex. Okay, it goes down and travels. What's the next box as it comes across? So you get your stimulus here. Okay, goes from your receptors, travels along here, and this is your what? What is this blue neuron right here?
Your sensory fibers.
Okay, afferent sensory fibers. Perfect. Those are the ones that carry the information from the sensation into the ganglion. Okay, so your afferent fiber. Afferent means information coming in from the stimulus. Okay. And then what is this right here?
Ganglion?
That's the ganglion, right? Goes into your autonomic ganglion. Okay, from the autonomic ganglion, this is your interneuron, this little white neuron right here. Okay, and then it feeds into this structure right here. What's this line right here?
The effector.
Ganglion.
Yeah, it's the post. Well, it should be post ganglionic neuron, but yeah. Okay, the ganglionic neuron, which it's a post ganglionic neuron. Should have put the word post in there, make it a little easier. And then this goes into the response.
Effector.
That's your peripheral effector, right? That's the effect that it has. And this is a short or a long reflex?
Short.
Short.
Ah, perfect. Now, how do you know it's short? Because it doesn't do what?
Go into the CNS.
Perfect. It's not going to the central nervous system. It's not into the spinal cord. It's not into the brain. It's a short reflex.